"Step aside, you're just a nurse," a young doctor shouted as the OR doors burst open. Code black alert. Multiple trauma incoming, monitors flashing, instruments scattered everywhere. The brown-haired woman didn't retreat. She simply turned to the whiteboard and wrote 3 clear command lines. 5 minutes later, the operating room ran like an orchestra. 12 minutes later, the chief surgeon rushed in breathlessly, then froze at the sight. That nurse was coordinating the entire OR with nothing but her calm voice. Calm. Her name was Nora Ainsley, 28 years old. European descent with long brown hair tied low, high nose bridge, deep brown eyes. Beautiful in a genuine way, never showy. She worked as an OR nurse at St. Halbert Medical Center, a frontline hospital by the coast. She wore dark blue scrubs, gray clogs, a wine-colored hair tie around her wrist, with a thin jacket hanging in locker 17B. Her daily routine was meticulous and purposeful. She always arrived 30 minutes early to check lighting, suction machines, backup oxygen tanks, and placed 2 clean start instrument trays beside each table. She drew workflow diagrams on the whiteboard: clean path, dirty path, emergency path. But her colleagues didn't appreciate her attention to detail. During shift briefings, residents sighed. "Nora's drawing diagrams again? When surgery starts, doctors make the decisions." A new surgeon mocked, "You're too obsessive. The OR isn't a classroom." In the cafeteria, someone joked half seriously, "If the chief is late, maybe the nurse will conduct the orchestra." Laughter erupted. Nora looked down, saying nothing. The dismissal was constant and undermining. Senior staff would override her suggestions about workflow optimization, claiming she overstepped her role. "Nurses assist. They don't design procedures," they'd say dismissively. During equipment checks, Nora's methodical approach was seen as excessive rather than thorough. "We don't need to triple-check everything," supervisors would tell her. "Follow standard protocols." But Nora had learned that details could mean the difference between life and death. On a typical day before the storm, Nora helped an elderly patient adjust her mask, advising her to drink water before waiting for tests. Nobody noticed these small acts of care. Instead of eating lunch, she went to storage to check gauze expiration dates, marking depleted trays with blue marker. She noticed the backup warning light in OR3 flickering abnormally and sent a maintenance note that no one read. The weather was setting up for system disruption. Unusual storms offshore caused widespread traffic jams. The chief surgeon was leaving a conference 15 kilometers away, trapped in flooded roads. Hospital pagers were intermittent, notifications arriving in delayed bursts. Nora tried to share her observations but was consistently ignored. Before a lengthy procedure, Nora reminded a resident, "The clean path today is prone to contamination due to rain, humidity, and reverse winds. Should we switch instrument exit to the left?" She was brushed off. "Stick to routine procedures." Her suggestions about backup protocols were dismissed as unnecessary paranoia. "You worry too much," colleagues would say. Emergency procedures exist for real emergencies. But Nora had seen how quickly situations could deteriorate when systems failed. She'd witnessed the chaos that ensued when protocols weren't properly maintained. Her experience had taught her that preparation prevented panic, that small details could save lives when everything went wrong. The other staff found her intensity exhausting and unnecessary. They worked in a modern hospital with sophisticated equipment and established procedures. The idea that they might need improvised solutions seemed far-fetched to them. Nora's insistence on backup plans and alternative workflows was seen as evidence of anxiety rather than wisdom. "Trust the system," they'd tell her. "Everything's designed to work properly." But Nora knew that systems failed, that emergencies didn't follow protocols, that someone needed to be ready when standard procedures weren't enough. Her colleagues' dismissal stung, but she continued her meticulous preparations anyway. She'd rather be over-prepared and mocked than under-prepared when lives were at stake. In her chest pocket, Nora always carried a silver pen engraved with small words: "Breathe, then decide." The pen was a gift from a retired head nurse who had taught Nora to take 4 slow breaths before making any difficult decision. The emergency struck suddenly and overwhelmingly. 1407. Radio crackled. Multiple trauma. Bus skidded off bridge. 7 red priority patients. 5 yellow priority. 1409 or 2 was being set up, but the chief was absent and the primary surgeon was trapped in an elevator due to localized power failure. A young doctor exploded with frustration. "Don't touch my protocols. Wait for me to select the team." The situation was spiraling out of control rapidly. Emergency department staff were calling up asking for immediate OR availability. Multiple trauma patients were en route, each requiring immediate surgical intervention. The hospital's carefully planned emergency protocols were falling apart due to absent leadership and communication failures. Nora was systematically excluded from decision-making. She proposed splitting operations, OR2 for chest and abdominal trauma, Oregon, 3 for orthopedic and vascular cases, Oregon, 1 as a buffer zone for overflow. Her suggestion was rejected. No one makes unilateral decisions without the chief's orders. The young doctor's pager lost signal just as the emergency department reported patients arriving 6 minutes ahead of schedule. Chaos was building as staff stood around waiting for clear direction that wasn't coming. The critical moment arrived when action became unavoidable. Nora looked at the clock and took 4 deep breaths. She pulled the whiteboard to the center of OR2 and wrote 3 large lines. Silence rule, 10 minutes, only called names may speak. Clean path left, dirty path right with colored arrows. Priority, airway, bleeding brain, ABB. 2 nurses looked at each other uncertainly, then nodded. Follow Nora's lead. We can't wait any longer. As Nora moved the board, her sleeve shifted, revealing a thin scar on her wrist. The suture pattern was precise and neat, like work from a forward surgical team. Her coordination commands were sharp and efficient, similar to battlefield radio communication. Blue 1 airway management. Green 2 suction preparation. Yellow cart clamp pack ready. She controlled the chaos through small, precise actions. She placed colored tape on suction tubes to prevent mix-ups. She folded sterile drapes at 45-degree angles so anyone could open them one-handed. She positioned clean start trays at 30-degree angles to tables, making them accessible from any position. The initial resistance gradually gave way to cooperation. The resident returned, initially angry. "Who authorized this?" Nora spoke calmly without raising her voice. "Doctor chooses cases. I maintain rhythm. Everyone's breathing with us now." He looked around and saw clear pathways, properly positioned monitors, running suction, fresh blood ready. He nodded. "Continue." The 10-minute silence created the first miracle. Nora raised her hand. Silence for 10 minutes. The noise level dropped dramatically. Emergency department wheeled in the first case. 30-year-old male with chest and abdominal trauma, weak pulse. Nora pointed. Airway green team, bleeding blue team, brain maintain warmth. 2 minutes later, airway secured, blood transfusion running, warming blanket covering head. Surgery commenced smoothly. The coordination sequence unfolded in precise 5, 7, 9-minute intervals. Minute 5, Nora transferred yellow priority patients to buffer OR1, preventing bottlenecks. Minute 7, clamp pack depleted. She opened back up clean start tray without any shouting or delays. Minute 9, primary suction clogged. Nora switched to backup in 2 seconds. Seamless transition unnoticed by most. Outside, observers began noticing something extraordinary was happening. A security guard almost entered the clean path. Nora pointed to the board with her pen, and he redirected as if hypnotized. The anesthesiologist muttered, "She's coordinating with just eye contact." The efficiency was remarkable and unprecedented. Equipment moved smoothly between stations without confusion or delay. Staff members anticipated each other's needs without verbal communication. The usual chaos of emergency surgery had been replaced by choreographed precision. Nora moved through the space like a conductor, making subtle adjustments that kept everything flowing. She checked monitors without interrupting procedures, repositioned equipment before anyone realized they needed it, managed supplies before shortages could develop. Her presence created a bubble of calm efficiency in what should have been pandemonium. The young doctor who had initially challenged her began following her lead without question. Other staff members stopped looking to absent supervisors for direction and instead watched Nora for cues. The 10-minute silence period allowed everyone to focus on their immediate tasks without distraction from competing voices. When communication was necessary, it happened through clear, minimal signals that everyone understood. Nora's system created predictability in an unpredictable situation. Staff knew where to move, what to expect, how to contribute without confusion or conflict. The result was seamless teamwork that accomplished more than anyone had thought possible. Emergency patients received immediate, coordinated care instead of waiting for leadership to arrive. Lives were being saved through organization rather than heroics. The transformation was visible to everyone watching. What had started as potential disaster was becoming a masterclass in crisis management. Visiting medical students from nearby universities stood in the observation areas, witnessing techniques they'd never learned in textbooks. "How is she doing this?" one student whispered to another. "Pure experience," a veteran nurse replied. "This is what real emergency medicine looks like." The efficiency levels were unprecedented for such a chaotic situation. Patient flow moved smoothly between departments without bottlenecks or delays. Communication happened through minimal, precise signals rather than shouting and confusion. Equipment allocation optimized automatically as Nora anticipated needs before they became critical. Under Nora's hair tie was tucked a small piece of faded red ribbon, fabric cut from the bandage of a battlefield doctor who had sacrificed his life for others. Whenever tension mounted, Nora touched it lightly, and her breathing slowed back to a steady rhythm. The chief surgeon finally arrived and stood frozen in amazement. 1419 or 2 doors opened. The chief stood soaked from rain, breathing heavily from rushing through flooded streets. He stopped immediately. The OR was running smoothly, silently, perfectly coordinated. Nora stood in the center, left hand holding a pen, right hand giving signals. He stared at the whiteboard, seeing the silence rule, clean, dirty path arrows, and ABB priority system. The dramatic revelation began to unfold slowly. The chief whispered to the head nurse, "Who wrote those lines?" "Nora." His eyes narrowed with recognition. "Is she the one who was with Forward Surgical Team?" The head nurse nodded slightly. "FST Falcon 3. She doesn't talk about it much." Nora's hidden past explained her rapid rhythm reading and crisis management skills. In 2020, Nora had been an OR nurse assigned to forward surgical teams during emergency evacuations. The field hospital was just canvas tents with intermittent power and minimal equipment. Nora learned to prepare 2 to 3 backup layers for every procedure. Clean path, dirty path, emergency path for rapid evacuation. She had lost a colleague, a young doctor, during a night operation when silence couldn't be maintained. Shouting disrupted the rhythm and caused fatal delays. From that moment, she engraved on her hand, "Breathe, then decide." She returned to St. Halbert, choosing to work quietly, never mentioning her combat experience. The techniques she'd learned saving lives in impossible conditions now seemed like overcautiousness in a modern hospital. But today proved that her preparation had been necessary all along. Justice arrived quietly, but definitively. The chief stepped forward, standing beside Nora without interfering. He spoke softly, matching the rhythm she was maintaining. "Ainsley, continue coordinating. I'll cover abdominal procedures." Nora nodded. "Yes, doctor." Then continued seamlessly. "Blue team, maintain suction. Green team, monitor temperature. Yellow team, open second clean set." The eyes that had once mocked her now showed newfound respect. The resident stood behind the chief, face flushed with embarrassment. He watched Nora signal for silence and followed without protest. The first case transitioned to suturing phase with stable, vital signs. The OR functioned like an orchestra under her quiet direction. Surgical lights angled low, suction humming steadily, anesthesia machines beeping stable rhythms. Nora moved in a circle, touching shoulders of tired staff, placing water bottles within reach, directing dirty equipment to proper disposal paths. No shouting, no competing commands, just shared rhythm and purpose. After 37 minutes, 2 critical cases passed through the danger zone. 2 red priority patients survived the critical window with stable airways, good blood flow, and protected brain function. A nurse whispered, "Those first 12 minutes saved the entire day, all because of her silence rule." The chief's public acknowledgement changed everything permanently. When patients were transferred out, the chief addressed the entire team. "I arrived late today. If this OR remained functional, it's because of Ainsley. From now on, the silence rule and ABB priority system become St. Halbert's standard protocol." He looked directly at Nora. "Ainsley, you'll lead the 10-minute OR program for the entire hospital." The recognition was official, public, and long overdue. Nora refused personal glory while accepting institutional change. Nora shook her head gently. "I just maintain rhythm, doctor. Everyone else does the saving." But the eyes of everyone in that room had changed forever. They had witnessed something extraordinary, true leadership emerging from the person they'd least expected. The young doctor who had dismissed her approached hesitantly. "I owe you an apology. I had no idea what you were capable of." Nora's response was gracious. "You weren't wrong to want clear protocols, but backup plans save lives when protocols fail." Other staff members began asking questions about her techniques. "How did you know to set up the buffer zone?" one nurse asked. "Where did you learn the 10-minute silence rule?" another inquired. Nora answered each question simply, focusing on practical applications rather than dramatic stories. Buffer zones prevent bottlenecks when multiple cases arrive simultaneously. Silence allows everyone to focus on immediate tasks without distraction. Color-coded paths reduce errors when people are operating under stress. Her explanations were technical and humble, avoiding any mention of combat experience or dramatic rescues. The chief began documenting Nora's innovations for hospital-wide implementation. "These techniques need to be taught to every surgical team," he announced. Nora insisted that the methods belong to everyone. They're just applications of basic workflow principles under pressure. The transformation of institutional culture began immediately. Residents who had dismissed her began requesting training in her techniques. Nurses who had felt powerless in crisis situations suddenly had tools for maintaining order. The 10-minute silence rule alone reduced errors and improved coordination dramatically. Staff members realized they had been witnessing expertise disguised as routine preparation. Nora's obsessive checking, her backup systems, her detailed diagrams, everything they'd mocked as excessive had been professional-level crisis management. The chief made the final announcement that sealed Nora's new status. Effective immediately, Nurse Ainsley will oversee emergency protocol development for all surgical departments. Her methods will be incorporated into our standard training curriculum. What happened here today proves that leadership can come from anywhere when someone is properly prepared. The room fell silent again, but this time it was the silence of respect rather than emergency protocol. Nora had not only saved lives today, she had transformed how an entire hospital understood teamwork and preparation. The young doctor who had initially challenged her now stood at attention. "Thank you for keeping us all in rhythm." Nora simply nodded and began cleaning up, preparing for the next emergency that would inevitably come. The change in hospital culture was immediate and profound. Word spread quickly through other departments about what had happened in OR2. Nurses from different units began requesting copies of Nora's protocols. "Can you teach us the 10-minute silence technique?" they asked. "How do you set up color-coded pathways for our department?" Nora spent the following days creating simplified versions of her techniques for various hospital units. Each department required different adaptations, but the core principles remained consistent. The chief observed these developments with growing amazement. "You've started a revolution," he told Nora during a brief meeting. "Not a revolution," she replied quietly. "Just common sense applied under pressure." The hospital's board of directors requested a formal presentation about the new protocols. Nora reluctantly agreed, though she insisted on keeping the focus practical rather than promotional. "Show them what works," she said, "not who created it." Medical professionals from neighboring hospitals began calling for information. The St. Halberd protocols were becoming famous throughout the regional medical community, but Nora remained focused on daily improvements rather than external recognition. She continued arriving early, checking equipment, preparing backup systems. The difference was that now other staff members joined her in these preparations. "If Nora thinks it's important," they reasoned, "then we should learn it too." The young doctor who had initially challenged her became one of her strongest advocates. "I was completely wrong about everything," he admitted publicly. "Nora saved us all." Training sessions began immediately to spread the techniques throughout the hospital. Nora insisted on hands-on practice rather than theoretical lectures. "You learn by doing," she explained, "not by talking about doing. Type, I owe a debt. If you've ever breathed safely in a moment of chaos thanks to someone who didn't need titles to maintain the rhythm that kept everyone alive." From one rainy afternoon, a permanent transformation began. 1 week later, small signs appeared at every OR entrance in St. Halberd. 10-minute or Protocol 1. Silence. First 10 minutes 2. Clean path left. Dirty path right 3. ABB, airway, bleeding, brain, no logos, no names, just black text on white background. Nora's training approach was characteristically simple and practical. She didn't organize lengthy seminars or complex presentations. Instead, she created a single A4 sheet, workflow diagram, minimum essentials checklist, key command phrases. She placed the laminated sheet at each surgical station, secured with clear tape. The young resident who had once been angry volunteered to distribute copies. "Follow this protocol. It saves time and saves lives." The changes were small, but the impact was substantial. Setup time decreased by 18% according to head nurse statistics over 2 weeks. Clean path and dirty path contamination incidents dropped to 0 cases. Feedback from anesthesiology. 10 minutes of silence helps establish airways 20 to 30 seconds faster. But Nora remained exactly as she had always been. She still used her silver pen and still touched the red ribbon when tension mounted. After each shift, she stayed late to arrange clean trays for the next day and wipe away any residual moisture. An anonymous note appeared on locker 17B. "Thank you for keeping rhythm for all of us. A clumsy resident." Nora smiled, tucked it into her pocket, and continued checking backup lighting systems. The institutional changes spread beyond the operating rooms. Other departments began adopting modified versions of the 10-minute protocol. Emergency rooms implemented silence periods during critical procedures. Intensive care units adopted clean, dirty pathway management. The ABB priority system became standard throughout the hospital. Nora's influence extended far beyond her original scope of work. Medical students began requesting rotations at St. Halberd, specifically to learn her techniques. Other hospitals sent observers to study the 10-minute protocol implementation. Medical journals published articles about improved surgical outcomes using silence-based coordination. But Nora avoided all publicity and recognition opportunities. When reporters requested interviews, she declined politely. When medical conferences invited her to speak, she suggested they interview the chief instead. "The techniques aren't mine," she insisted. "They're just practical applications of teamwork principles." Her humility made her influence even more powerful and authentic. Staff respected her not just for her skills, but for her character and dedication to service over recognition. The chief began receiving calls from hospitals worldwide asking about the St. Halberd protocols. "How did you develop these techniques?" they'd ask. "We didn't develop them," he'd reply. "We finally listened to someone who already knew them." Nora's daily routine remained unchanged despite her new responsibilities. She arrived early, checked equipment, prepared backup systems, maintained her detailed diagrams. The difference was that now these actions were seen as expressions of expertise rather than obsessive behavior. New staff quickly learned that following Nora's example was the path to excellence. They began arriving early, checking backup systems, preparing for contingencies. The culture shift was complete. Preparation replaced panic. Rhythm replaced chaos. 6 months later, St. Halbert had the lowest surgical error rate in the regional hospital network. Staff turnover decreased as nurses felt empowered and valued. Patient satisfaction scores improved as procedures became more efficient and less stressful. Nora's quiet revolution had transformed not just emergency protocols, but the entire hospital culture. Yet she continued to work with the same humble dedication that had always characterized her service. "I just keep rhythm," she'd say when congratulated. "Everyone else does the real work." Type, "I will live decently." If you believe that 1 minute of proper silence can save an entire day for many people, Nora's story transcends the operating room to teach universal principles about leadership and preparation. Her story isn't about a superhero, but about decent discipline, putting people before voices, results before recognition. Titles don't control life's rhythm, calm competence does. When information flow breaks down, systems either collapse or survive based on someone who knows how to breathe and help others breathe. The lesson applies to every workplace, offices, factories, classrooms. Those first 10 minutes of quiet focus, clear pathways for essential versus non-essential communication, and proper prioritization of core tasks can save entire days. Perhaps your team has a Nora, someone who doesn't compete for the microphone but maintains the rhythm that keeps everyone functional. Learn to recognize and respect these quiet leaders. Every system needs rhythm keepers, people who create boards, draw arrows, arrange clean trays, do small tasks that enable big accomplishments. In a rainy afternoon crisis, when the chief stood frozen at the door, he witnessed truth. Nurses don't just assist, they preserve life through creating order from chaos. Nora's techniques work because they address human psychology under stress. Silence reduces competing voices that create confusion during critical moments. Clear pathways prevent errors when people are operating under pressure. Simple prioritization helps teams focus on what matters most first. These principles apply beyond medicine to any high-stakes environment. Emergency responders use similar techniques during disaster response. Military units depend on clear communication protocols during operations. Air traffic controllers maintain safety through systematic procedures. Even families can benefit from these approaches during stressful situations. The key insight is that chaos creates chaos, but calm competence creates more calm competence. When one person maintains rhythm, others naturally synchronize to that rhythm. Leadership isn't about being loudest or highest ranking. It's about being most prepared when preparation matters most. Nora succeeded because she understood that crises reveal character rather than create it. Her years of detailed preparation, backup planning, and systematic thinking paid off when systems failed. The combat experience that shaped her perspective remained hidden until circumstances demanded those skills. True expertise often looks like overcautiousness until emergency situations prove its value. The most important leaders are often the quietest ones, working behind scenes to prevent problems rather than solving them dramatically. Nora's legacy lives in every surgical team that now operates more efficiently, every patient who receives better care, every crisis that unfolds more smoothly. But her greatest impact is cultural, proving that anyone can lead when they're properly prepared and willing to serve others. The next time you face chaos, remember Nora's example. Breathe first, then decide. Create clear pathways, eliminate unnecessary noise, focus on core priorities. Sometimes the most powerful response to impossible situations is quiet competence and willingness to maintain rhythm for others.
If you believe in stories that touch the heart like this one, leave a comment. And don't forget to subscribe to Ellen Steelheart Stories. We tell the stories that shouldn't be forgotten. Real people are creating and telling stories, not mass-produced AI.